The digital readout on the squad leader's thermal optic flickers to 0314 AM. In the frozen, jagged silence of a tree line near the Donbass, the air is so cold it feels like glass. Somewhere in the pitch-black void, 1,500 meters away, a Russian reconnaissance element moves with the practiced arrogance of men who believe they are beyond the reach of infantry small arms. They are wrong. They are walking into the engagement envelope of a weapon that defies the traditional laws of ballistic physics. The sky does not scream with the roar of a jet or the whistle of a mortar. Instead, the night is punctured by a deep, rhythmic thud that vibrates in the chest of every man on the ridge. For the Russian unit, the world ends before they even hear the report. The objective was textbook simple: hold the high ground and suppress any movement across the valley floor. In the old world of infantry warfare, this was a job for the M240 Bravo, a reliable workhorse that has defined American lethality since the late 70s. But in the vast, open expanses of modern conflict zones, the 7.62mm NATO round has found its limit. At 1,200 meters, the old machine guns begin to lose their bite, their bullets tumbling into the dirt while the Russian PKM gunners return fire with a terrifying reach. Simple became suicidal. The American squad was pinned outranged by a legacy Soviet caliber that turned their superior training into a liability. They were supposed to be the masters of the battlefield, but the geography of the fight had shifted against them. The mission wasn't just stalling, it was a death trap waiting for a single mistake until the silence was broken by something much, much heavier. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thorne shifted his weight, the weight of the RM-338, pressing into the damp earth of the embankment. At 34, with a decade spent hauling the M240 through the mountains of the Hindu Kush, Thorne knew the exact moment when a firefight turned from a contest of skill into a math problem. He watched through the high-powered optic as the Russian team began to deploy a tripod-mounted Kornet missile system. They were calm moving with the deliberate slowness of men who believed the 1,500-meter gap between them was an impenetrable wall. Thorne reached for the charging handle, a movement that felt less like a soldier preparing for contact and more like a judge reaching for a gavel. He didn't ask for permission. He had been given the weapon's free order the moment the enemy crossed the line of departure. With one smooth pull, he made a decision that would not just stop a missile, it would erase the men behind it. The sudden appearance of the 338 on this ridgeline wasn't an accident. It was a response to a decade of tactical humiliation. For years, the Pentagon watched as American infantry were consistently outdistanced in the jagged valleys of Afghanistan and the flat plains of Eastern Europe. The Russian 7.62x54 MMR fired from the venerable PKM held a slight but decisive range advantage over the American M240, allowing Moscow's proxies to poke the bear from a safe distance. In Washington, the Irregular Warfare Office saw this capability gap as a strategic wound that needed cauterizing. The RM-338 was born out of a desperate requirement for Overmatch, the need to hit back harder and further than the enemy could ever conceive. The high-level command in Caracas and Moscow viewed these American deployments as mere provocations, assuming the US was still tied to the ballistics of the 1970s. They underestimated the hunger for a weapon that could bridge the gap between a portable machine gun and a heavy anti-materiel rifle. The RM-338 is a masterclass in ballistic violence, a 2 5-pound titanium and steel predator designed to deliver the humongous 338 Norma Magnum round at 525 rounds per minute. Unlike the standard 7.62mm that sheds its lethality after a kilometer, this cartridge maintains supersonic performance out beyond 1,700 meters, carrying over 6,300 joules of muzzle energy, nearly triple the punch the M240. The physical reality of this weapon is staggering. It provides 95% of the ballistics of a .50 caliber Browning, but in a package that a single grunt can carry over a mountain. Thorne's loadout was specific 4 belts of linked polymer-cased ammunition, reducing the weight of the brass while retaining the terrifying internal pressures required to push a 300-grain projectile at 2,750 feet per second. This isn't just a gun, it's a portable kinetic engine. Every component from the 2-4-inch match-grade barrel to the short recoil impulse averaging system is engineered to ensure that when the hammer drops, the recoil feels like a constant gentle push rather than the bone-jarring kick of a magnum. The moment the Russian unit began their final approach, the tactical reality of the battlefield had already been settled in a digital vacuum. While the Russian scouts relied on line of sight and legacy radio reports, Thorne's position was integrated into an overarching network of American situational awareness that made the fight look like a scripted exercise. The RM-338 wasn't working alone. It was the sharp end of a spear, guided by high-altitude drones and Aegis-linked sensor nodes that had classified the intruders as hostile long before they unslung their rifles. On Thorne's optic, the fire control system was calculating the ballistic solution in milliseconds, accounting for the 1, 2, mile-per-hour crosswind, and the air density of the ridgeline. This is the essence of Overmatch. The enemy was fighting a 20th century war of grit and iron, while the Americans were operating in a 21st century reality of data and physics. The Russian PKM, once the king of the long-range suppressive fire, was suddenly reduced to a museum piece. Its maximum effective range was now a dead zone, where Thorn could pick them off with the precision of a marksman, but the volume of a machine gun. The US system had already simulated 18 different engagement outcomes, and in every single one, the Russian squad was erased before they could even identify the source of the fire. The sheer technical disparity turned the upcoming clash into something clinical, almost heartless. To the Americans, the Russian movement wasn't a threat. It was a series of coordinates waiting to be closed. The fight was over before Thorn even touched the trigger, as the system confirmed a 98% probability of a first burst kill. The atmosphere inside the Mobile Tactical Operations Center, hidden miles behind the ridge, is a stark contrast to the mud and grit of Thorn's position. Here the air is climate controlled and smells of ozone and stale coffee. The only light comes from a wall of high-definition monitors casting a cold blue glow over the faces of the mission controllers. Captain Sarah Chin stands at the center of this digital hive, watching the live feed from a circling Reaper drone. On her screen, the Russian platoon is represented by a cluster of heat signatures, oblivious and vulnerable. The data link from Thorn's RM-338 pulses on her console, confirming his fire control system is locked. There is no shouting, no frantic radio calls, only the rhythmic hum of cooling fans. Chin's voice is a flat professional monotone as she delivers the final authorization. Weapons, posture, alpha. You are cleared to prosecute. With a single keystroke, she bridges the gap between high-level strategy and the cold reality of physics on the ground. The electromagnetic spectrum above the valley suddenly becomes a chaotic battlefield of invisible lightning. As Thorn prepares to fire, the American electronic warfare suite begins its silent scream, flooding the Russian radio nets with ghost signals and static. The intruders' RWR, their radar warning receivers, start to howl a frantic, discordant tone, signaling that they are being tracked by a source they cannot locate. In the distance, the Russian squad leader pauses a moment of pure instinctual hesitation. A rational commander would recognize the electronic signature of a superior force and order an immediate withdrawal, but he is a product of 23 years of rigid doctrine and the uncompromising pressure of Moscow's two mandates. He cannot retreat without a fight. His self-worth and his orders won't allow it. On the ridge, Thorn watches the Russian commander through his optic, seeing the man's jaw set in a grim, defiant line. It is a classic tragedy of the human element caught in the gears of a high-tech machine. The Russian believes his training and his iron will can overcome the digital storm, unaware that the American system has already calculated his path of least resistance and turned it into a killing funnel. Thorn feels a brief, fleeting moment of empathy for the man on the other end of the glass, but it is quickly suppressed by the cold weight of the RM-338. The Russian commander makes his choice, and in that split second, he seals his fate. He raises his arm, signaling his team to deploy the Cornet's tripod, a move that transitions their presence from a reconnaissance probe to an active threat. On the ridge, Thorn's fire control system registers the movement instantly. The seeker in his optic growls a low-frequency vibration that travels through the stock and into his cheekbone, followed by the steady, high-pitched lock tone that signals a perfect ballistic solution. The target is no longer a human being. It is a thermal signature centered in a digital reticule. Thorn exhales the air, leaving his lungs in a slow, controlled mist, and squeezes the trigger. In that moment, the engagement crosses the invisible line from a tense provocation to an act of war. The 338 Norma Magnum round leaves the suppressed barrel with a muffled crack, a supersonic messenger of death that covers the 1,500-meter gap in less than 2 seconds. The reaction from the American ridge is not a chaotic spray of lead, but a clinical execution of the Overmatch doctrine. As Thorn's first burst leaves the barrel, the RM-338's short recoil system cycles with the precision of a Swiss watch, absorbing the massive impulse before the next round is even chambered. In the Tactical Operations Center, the order is relayed with chilling brevity. Engage primary and secondary. ESSM, 2 rounds. For the Russian Cornet team, the end doesn't come from the sky they were watching, but from a coordinated wall of kinetic energy. The American fire control net synchronizes Thorn's suppressive fire with a precision mortar strike, creating a kill box that leaves no room for survival. The suppressed report of the 338 is barely a whisper against the backdrop of the valley, but its effects are loud. The polymer-cased rounds find their mark with terrifying accuracy, punching through the light armor of the Russian equipment as if it were cardboard. This is what the weapon was born for, to end a confrontation before the enemy can even locate the muzzle flash. Every movement from the Americans is practiced cold and utterly dominant, turning the ridge into a one-way street of destruction. The lethality of this moment isn't just about accuracy, It's a matter of advanced terminal ballistics. As the 338 Norma Magnum projectiles impact the Russian position, they aren't behaving like the standard 7.62mm rounds the enemy is trained to survive. These 300 grain Sierra Match King bullets are engineered with a ballistic coefficient so high they defy regional wind patterns. Upon impact, the sheer kinetic energy over 6,000 joules creates a hydrostatic shockwave that liquefies soft tissue and shatters bone instantly. The American system utilizes a proprietary guidance logic that allows the RM-338 to maintain a sub-MOA group even during sustained fire. While the Russian PKM relies on a design from the 1960s, struggling with barrel whip and thermal drift, the RM-338's thrust-vectoring internal buffers and match-grade tolerances turn every burst into a laser-thin stream of lead. To a Russian soldier suppressed by this fire, the experience is like being targeted by a sniper rifle with the fire rate of an Uzi. Legacy armor that once stood up to NATO small arms is now as useful as a clay pigeon against a sledgehammer. The engagement log on Thorne's heads-up display tells the story with the cold finality of a court reporter. Time 031604. First intercept achieved at exactly 1,508 meters. Total engagement duration 11 seconds. In that brief window of time, the RM-338 cycled through 28 rounds of 338 Norma Magnum, achieving a 94% hit probability across the primary target cluster. There were no misses to correct, no ranging shots required. The Russian Cornet team didn't have time to dive for cover or even release the safety on their own weapons. The digital record shows the enemy heat signatures flatlining before the sound of the first supersonic crack had even echoed back from the valley walls. It is a battle report written in the language of efficiency, where victory is measured in seconds and a complete lack of American casualties. The suppression phase ends and the execution phase begins. As the remaining Russian scouts attempt to drag their wounded toward a shallow ditch, Thorne adjusts his selector to semi-auto, utilizing the RM-338's unique DMR-like precision. This is no longer a defensive skirmish, it is a clinical sentencing. Through the 8x magnification, he watches as a Russian sergeant tries to reach for a radio, likely a desperate plea for artillery support. Thorne's reticle settles on the man's chest. At this range, the 338 round arrives with the force of a high-speed collision. Traveling so fast, the target is hit before the sound of the shot even leaves the tree line. This is the sentence phase of modern Overmatch. The Americans aren't just holding ground, they are demonstrating that within an 1,800-meter radius, they own the right to life and death. The Russian survivors realize too late that they aren't facing a machine gunner, they are facing a mobile, belt-fed executioner. The plumes of dust kicked up by the heavy rounds are the only markers of a fight that has become a total wipeout. When you look at the balance sheet of this engagement, the math is as brutal as the ballistics. Each polymer-cased 338 Norma Magnum round cost the American taxpayer roughly $4 a drop in the ocean, compared to the millions spent on the Russian Cornet missile system and the years of specialized training invested in the elite reconnaissance team now lying in the dirt. The return on investment for the US Army is staggering. For less than $200 in ammunition, Thorne neutralized a strategic threat that could have destroyed a $60 million Abrams tank. But the invisible profit is even higher. By engaging at 1,500 meters, the U.S. collected invaluable real-world data on Russian reactions to Overmatch, digitized their desperate radio frequencies, and confirmed that their legacy body armor is functionally obsolete. In the cold world of modern warfare, the RM-338 isn't just a gun. It's a high-yield investment that turns lead into strategic dominance, proving that the cheapest way to win a war is to make the enemy's equipment irrelevant before it even reaches the front. Within hours, the inevitable happens. Moscow's state-run media outlets flood the airwaves with grainy footage accusing the U.S. of unprovoked aggression against a peaceful patrol. But the American response is a masterclass in strategic humiliation. Instead of a long-winded diplomatic protest, the Pentagon simply releases the RM-338's integrated sensor logs and the Reaper's high-definition thermal feed. The world watches as the peaceful patrol is caught red-handed, deploying an anti-tank missile system. By backing up their kinetic dominance with undeniable digital truth, the US frames the encounter not as a skirmish, but as a lawful enforcement of international norms. The Russian narrative collapses under the weight of its own captured data, leaving their military leadership looking both tactically incompetent and diplomatically dishonest. When the smoke finally clears and the first rays of dawn touch the valley floor, the true cost of the encounter is laid bare. A recovery team, if one ever comes, will find a debris field that tells a story of absolute technological rejection. They will find the twisted, blackened remains of the Cornet launcher, its optics shattered by the heavy 338 rounds. They will find scorched Russian winter gloves still clutching the handles of weapons that never fired, and a tattered tactical map fluttering in the cold wind. There are no dramatic final stands here, only the quiet, grim reality of what happens when 1970s iron meets 21st century physics. A single cracked helmet lies in the mud, its internal padding exposed, a small haunting reminder that while the systems are digital, the lives lost are very much analog. The silence that returns to the ridge is a new kind of silence. It is the realization that courage, while noble, is no longer the deciding factor on the modern battlefield. The Russian squad wasn't defeated because they were cowardly, they were defeated because they were mathematically irrelevant. In the era of the RM, 338 warfare has shifted from a contest of wills to a competition of integrated systems. This is the analog courage versus digital fight reality. A soldier can have 30 years of experience and the heart of a lion, but if he is standing in a kill zone calibrated by a supercomputer and serviced by a 338 caliber Predator, he is already a ghost. The legendary PKM and the brave men who carry it have become museum pieces before they even leave the tree line. The American Overmatch doctrine has proven that the most merciful way to fight is to be so overwhelmingly superior that the enemy's only rational choice is to never show up at all, never bring a legacy to a future fight. If you're standing in the crosshairs of a 338 Norma Magnum, you aren't a combatant, you're a statistic. This is the new face of American infantry power, where distance is a weapon and data is the ammunition. If this breakdown of the Army's new nightmare changed the way you look at the modern battlefield, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications.